I am Joni Robbins, and I am the Purchasing Director for the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And so today we are going to talk about rules of state procurement. We're going to talk about registering with the state. We will go over the electronic vendor portal, some purchasing methods. We're going to talk about seeking competition and some solicitation and evaluation methods, as well as the award process and contract monitoring. We're also going to cover what's the difference between a rule and a law pertaining to purchasing for the state, and what's considered a good versus what's considered a service. And what do we mean by delegation, and how about policy? We're going to talk about those things, and as well as what are the different types of contracts that we have with the state. So this slide that you're looking at is really the hierarchy for the purchasing rules with the state. To our left, the general statutes, those are really laws that are put in place by legislation. Representatives both in the House and in the Senate. And so from that, we have rules that are put in place to help us enact the laws there. And those rules are what we refer to as our administrative code. And then we have a North Carolina procurement manual, which is really more policy, and it identifies the course of actions that the agencies will put in place to follow the administrative rules. And we also have each agency will have their own purchasing manual. That manual must be in line with the North Carolina procurement manual, and it cannot contradict it in any way or any of the other hierarchies higher up. We cannot have policies and procedures that are not in line with the North Carolina procurement manual or with the administrative code, and obviously with the general statutes. I also added the budget manual down there as well, because it does offer the agency some guidance regarding allowable expenses in terms of reimbursements and travel. What you're seeing here is the governing authority for purchasing across the state. And so for goods and services, we have the North Carolina Department of Administration, the Division of Purchasing Contracts, and those rules are covered under General Statute 143 in Article 3 of that chapter. And the administrative codes are listed that as well, and is pertaining to goods and services in Chapter 5 under Title 1. For IT, that is covered in General Statute 147, and for goods and services for IT, that's covered in General Statute 147. And administrative code for that is in Chapter 6 under Title 9. I also have there the state construction as a third arm of authority. Obviously, the state construction office covers construction, renovation, and any type of alteration to the physical properties belonging to the state. And the rules governing their purchasing are covered in General Statutes, chapters 116, 143, and 153. And then they also have a separate state construction manual that governs their policy and procedures as well. So who are the potential customers, and really what we're asking, and what opportunities are there to work with the state? There are numerous. If you see here, we have 28 executive state agencies. Oh, sorry. And we have 58 community college, 16 public universities, over 2,500 public and charter schools, covering 100 counties and over 500 municipalities. So there are a lot of opportunities within the state to do business and to get contract awards. This is a listing of state agencies and support organizations for the state. If you look in the right column, it says type of agency. The cabinet, the agencies that are denoted as cabinet, those are the agency heads that are appointed by the governor. The ones that have council beside it, those are the agencies that are headed by our elected officials. So those are the folks that you elect to run those agencies. And then at the last part of the list, there are the support agencies for the state as well. So let's kind of get into talking about purchasing. And so how is need identified? The agency really, with the end user within the agency really are thinking about what they're buying, how much does it cost, um, does the division or business unit have the money, right? Is funding there for, and how do we buy it? And what is the documentation that's needed to do that? And so once they think through that process, and my team, the purchasing team, will to determine what they're trying to buy and how much does it cost. We're going to kind of, we need to know the answers to that. Whether we are looking at a good versus a service, or and in some procurements you have both. The delegation, is it how much it costs? Is it over or under our agency delegation? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And also, one of the things we look at in the purchasing department is whether the good and or service can be procured through a mandated resource, or do we need to use the open market, or which is a competitive process. And we'll talk a little bit more about mandated resources and open market a little further in the presentation. Goods versus services. So a good obviously is all commodity supplies and materials, anything that's tangible. And for any goods that are contracted, there is a 1.75% vendor charge for goods. And those are just a picture of some examples. Anything that are actually tangible. Our office supplies. When we're talking about services, we're really talking about intangible work. This is work that's performed by an individual or company that requires specialized knowledge, experience, obviously expertise, and similar capabilities. So some example we have here is it looks like a plumber, just someone who's actually going to do a task, perform a task. And this guy is power washing. So those are examples of that. So let's talk a little bit about agency delegation. Each state and community college and university has a set general purchasing delegation, the amount that the agency or community college or university can spend, can contract, right, can authorize and issue a purchase order for without having additional review and approval. So for goods and services that are non-IT, we have the Division of Purchase and Contracts in the Department of Administration, who, under the direction of the state purchasing officer, will approve our any purchases over $50,000, and that's really the benchmark. So that's the delegation amount for, I believe, all agencies, community colleges and universities. I think have a different one, a higher one, obviously. But for the agencies, it's $50,000. So if my agency, if we and NCDOT, we do plenty of over $50,000 purchases. But we are required to, for those, we are required to have the Division of Purchase and Contract review and approve our recommendation to award. We will actually do the award, but they have to take a look at it before. What helps us here at NCDOT, we have what we call a special delegation. And so for many of the goods and services that are germane to NCDOT, we're a little different than other agencies in that, our highway maintenance, construction, and all that is needed to support the highway system across the state are really germane to NCDOT. So a lot of our goods and services, we have been fortunate enough to get the approval from the state purchasing office to give us a a special delegation with that, and we do not have to send those over to the Division of Purchasing Contracts. We are allowed within, they recognize the expertise and the work that my team does. And so we're allowed to award and approve those without the additional review and approval, which really helps in times of, in terms of timing and being able to award contracts and get the goods and or services to our end users, right? Our divisions, our business units when they need that. So for all purchases under the delegation, which is that $50,000 mark, we process them completely, execute the document as well. Again, as I stated, if it's over and it's a goods and services non-IT, it is reviewed by the Division of Purchasing Contracts. And if it's an IT item, the Department of Information Technology also has a statewide IT purchasing office that will review any IT items that are over the agency delegation. So just talk a little bit about purchasing policy in terms of the open market. This is an example of what one would look like. Again, I'm North Carolina Department of Transportation, so this is really NCDOT's purchasing policy. So if you're working with a different agency, it might look slightly different depending upon the agent, but the general tone and how they approach it will be pretty much the same. So for NCDOT, if it's a purchase of $10,000 or less, we consider that to be a micro purchase. But it's particularly goods, we do have a slight exception for maybe a service or two, not many, but those goods and our services are procured by what we call a P card or the procurement card. Each agency have a procurement card program. It's really like a credit card. And so for DOT, if the divisions or business units are making purchases that are in that range, $10,000 or less, they generally do not come through my department. They will just make their purchase using a P card. Then if it's $10,001 up to $25,000, NCDOT considers that to be a small purchase, whether it's goods or service, and we require that a current vendor quote for that. And we generally will use our RFQ or IFB for those services. Many times we have contractual services that fall within that category. And because of the requirements that are either HIPAA or some eco-friendly reasons, we are required to make sure that there's a firm and signed understanding with the vendor. And so we will use our documents for that because on our documents, and that's the RFQ, the IFB, there are terms and conditions that are attached. As well as within the documents, there are requirements that are clearly defined that we have to make sure by state regulation that the vendor is doing. And so for the category of $25,001 up to $50,000, we at NCDOT consider that to be an informal purchase, whether it's goods or services. In this category, competition is required, but not advertisement. So in this category, we will seek competition, and we will do that by getting vendor quotes. But we will not advertise it. We will not post it on IPS, right? And so, but because of the requirement is that the vendor has to agree to the North Carolina's terms and conditions, we will be using our documents, whether that is a RFQ, a IFB, or in rare occasions within this dollar amount would we use a RFP, which is a request for proposal. But it is possible. And so anything that's over $50,001, we consider that to be a formal purchase, whether it's goods or services. We are required for the vendor to agree to North Carolina terms and conditions. So we will be using our document. Advertisement is required for that category unless we have an approved waiver. Okay. And we'll talk about a waiver in a little bit, but a waiver is under some very clear conditions in which we can waive. What we're waiving is competition. We're saying that for these specific reasons, we it is not in the best interest of the state and for the best interest of the state or for time management that we will advertise those that particular good or service that's needed. Here at NCDOT, my team is not allowed to do an approved waiver without my agreement. But I believe firmly in purchasing. I believe firmly in competition. And so we are not going to provide approval for waiver of competitions unless it's absolutely, there's no way around it, right? In some cases, some manufacturers or vendors have specific regions that you can only buy if within that region, or you can only buy the product from specific vendor within that region. In those cases, then it would not be cost effective for the state to do a competitive process because we can only get it from one place, right? But then I'm also going to ask the question, then why do we have to have that particular product? Is there anything else that is comparable that's on the market that would allow us to do a competitive process? So we're going to ask those right kinds of questions to make sure that we are competing as many opportunities as we can. And at the bottom of the screen there, you will see a contract term. It's standard 3 years. Generally, it's 1 year with 2 renewable options. Most contracts would say that. For any contract that's over 3 years, it requires us to get the Division of Purchasing Contracts, the state purchasing officer's approval for that. We do have contracts that are longer than 3 years. Most of them, as I stated, are 1 year with 2 renewable options. And also any contract that's estimated to be over $1 million, and we have many of those as well. We have it reviewed by both the legal team here at NCDOT as well as when it's over at Purchasing and Contracts. They will also have their legal contract management, their legal team take a look at it. And this is prior to posting and prior to award as well. So here we're going to talk about state term contracts. The basic definition is a binding agreement between the purchaser and the vendor to buy and sell certain commodities, right, at certain prices under certain terms and conditions. So we have what we call a statewide term contracts, and these are contracts that are established by Division of Purchasing Contracts for use by all agencies, unless you are exempted by the statute, rule, or special conditions, and there are not a lot of those, right? So most agencies are required to buy the good and or service from a state term contract if it is mandatory. So a state term contract has 2 categories, right? It can either be a mandatory state term contract in which the agency have no real choice unless what we are trying to buy out the contract, if that vendor cannot provide it in the time frame that we need or in the quantities that we need, then we are generally given a release and we're able to seek those products or those services in another manner. But if the vendor on the state term contract can provide what you need when you need it, then we are required to buy it from those vendors that are listed on the state term contract. A state term contract can also be considered a convenience contract. They will say one or the other, right? There's a state term contract has a number and it would indicate whether it's mandatory or it would say it is a convenience. If it's a convenience, then it's up to the state agencies to choose to use that vendor or not. They may do a competitive process If competition is required, they may do, or they may buy it from the state term contract. It's up to the agency at that point if it's a convenience. We think the advantage of these state term contracts are that we'll offer lower prices, good quality of products, and shorter delivery times. We also have what we call agency-specific term contracts, which is really obviously specific to the agency. And for instance, for NCDOT, we do things, we have, obviously, we're mainly focused on highways, right? We got other things. We have aviation, rail, ferry. So we have other business units within NCDOT. So but those are also very specialized kinds of um, tasks that we are doing. And so there are many things that we buy, goods and services, that are really germane only to NCDOT, like no other agency is probably going to use it. And across the agency, we do have some commonality in things that if not all, then maybe multiple divisions will be using it, or multiple business units will be using it. And if we see and identify that, then it makes sense for my team to put together an agency term contract in which for the agency to buy from the different divisions or business units within NCDOT. But it's not a requirement for any other agency to use these agency term contracts. It would be used within the agency. And these are generally indefinite quantity contracts, which means that we are not guaranteeing any volume on the contracts. And we typically the award is based on historical data, which means we take a look at what I just said. We take a look at the usage and what we're doing. Does it make sense to aggregate these and put them on an agency term contract? And so service contracts, there are really two different types of service contracts. There is the contractual service, and then there's the consultant piece of it, right? And so what's the difference? And so a contractual service contract is what it says here. It's generally an independent vendor who performs work or tasks that requiring a specialized knowledge and skills and experience. And these are some listed there, some examples of contractual service contracts. And a consultant service contract is where the work or task is performed. Again, we are requiring specialized knowledge or experience and with a professional qualification, but these consultants will investigate what we're asking them to look for, right? And then they will provide counsel, review, analysis, or advice, right? They're not going to actually perform a task. They're not going to, come and actually do something. They're going to advise. They are going to provide us with an analysis. They are going to counsel us. So that's a consultant. We're going to consult with them. And so that's the difference. In all consultant contracts are required to be approved by the governor's office, but that's not a process that would be visible to outside of the state, the agency, because really what happens if NCDOT was doing a consultant contract, and it's over $50,000, and most of them are, we will go through that process within my team. Then we would send it to the purchasing contracts division. Remember, I say anything over $50,000. And if we don't have a special delegation for it, so that we don't have to send it to PNC, then we will send it to PNC. They will review, basically our steps. What they're looking for is to ascertain, make sure that we have followed those procedures and processes that are outlined in the procurement manual, that we have followed the administrative codes, right? That we've done those processes the way they're designed to be done. And within PNC's approval process, if it's a consultant contract, they have a contact within the governor's office on his staff that review those and will provide that feedback back to PNC, which will be included in the approval that we receive from PNC. So it's a transparent process. But it is an additional step if it's a consultant contract that we're working on. Are there any questions so far?
The only question we have in the chat right now is whether or not access to the recording will be shared, and that answer is yes. We will also email a copy of the presentation. And so no other questions in the chat, and don't know if anyone has a question following that module. If you have a question, you may unmute and ask.
This is Carla Jones. I have a question, please.
Hi,
Yes.
Carla.
Hey, good morning. Question is, I've attended a number of sessions, information sessions and things that have been presented, which I, first of all, greatly appreciate, and I think that they're extremely informative. I do have a question about if this same information that we're receiving today applies to, I guess I feel like the majority of the contracts or information that's being shared are more for products. And so our company is a catering company. Do you feel like these same things would apply? Because it seems like it's very product driven or service on construction type driven.
So thank you for your question. So answer to that is it really isn't. I happen to work for NCDOT, so a lot of what we do is geared around construction, but not all that we do, right? And mainly just FYI, in terms of the actual construction of roads, that is done under a different statute. Everything that we're talking about here today is done under General Statute 143, right? That's totally different. All construction is done under a different general statute, and it's actually 136. And those are bidded out within the divisions that is covering the highway that they're doing. So that doesn't even come through my office. So no, what we are talking about today really covers all goods and services, and is not specific to construction or even NCDOT. I did show NCDOT's purchasing policy because that's who I happen to work for. And I think that call it if the office of the hub office will partner with another agency, then that agency, when they are providing this training, will probably put up their policy because that's what they have and that's what they use and that's what they feel more comfortable talking about. But no, with regard to catering specifically, that is considered a service. And so the items that we're talking about with regard to service will be applicable to that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, somewhat. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? So if no more questions, Joni, we can proceed.
Okay, sorry. I can do, all right, sorry. All right. So we are going to switch gears here and move into the process you need to follow if you want to do business with the state. So we're going to talk about the electronic vendor portal. We're going to talk about registering in EVP and how the managing of the EVP account. So EVP, electronic vendor portal, the basics are what we have here. I think the takeaways from this slide are that it is a single cloud-based application, with enhanced features that allows for greater efficiency. It also provides a single point of access to government organizations, and it's also, but also want to point out that for goods, right, there is that 1.75% fee that vendors are charged. I want to also always make sure that that's put out there in the forefront. For the North Carolina Electronic Vendor Portal, which you will see as EVP, so you know that's what that is. It is it offers free registration, right? It keeps you as the vendor need to really make sure you keep your information that's there updated. It allows for automatic business notifications, so you will get for the commodities that you selected, services that you selected that you want to do business with the state for those. And when those type of opportunities are posted, then EVP will send you an email, a notification to let you know that something has been posted that corresponds with the commodities that you selected. It's a one-stop registration opportunity as well. So the registration, obviously you need internet access to do that. You need your federal ID, tax ID, or your EIN number, your employer identification number. You also need to have a valid email address in order to initiate both in the EVP as well as the HUB certification process for that. As Carla stated, you will be getting a copy of this presentation. So if you go back, this link here that's shown there is really some really great job aids that are out there that will help you with your vendor portal registration if you need that. There's also the contact information, telephone help desk number for e-procurement, and they also offer excellent help. They're always responsive. And we called them, the state called them for different questions, obviously, but they've always been responsive and been very helpful to me. Remember, it's free. And when you are registered, you will be notified of business opportunities pertaining to the commodities that you identified. But please remember that you need to make sure your information is kept up to date. In managing your account, there's a link there as well. There's a job aid there that provides directions on if you want to if you need to change your password or update your profile information, if you need to add, delete, or edit any of that information, if you want to update your vendor name or add or edit your location, all that is done there as well. The frequently asked questions we have there. Most people are asking, why do we have to pay that 1.75% fee? We believe that the fee offsets the expense of the development and maintenance ongoing of this electronic process, which allows you to have a 24/7 access to business opportunities within the state. It also allows you to market yourself within the state, and because we do take a look at what vendors are out there, particularly in those small dollar or those $50,000 and less opportunities for the agencies. We do take a look at vendors that are hub vendors that are certified that offer those goods and services. And so that's one reason why it's really important that you keep your contact information up to date. How does my company benefit by using EVP? We think that it's a cost savings from you in terms of processing, marketing, because it's all there in one place for you. It increased order accuracy and consistency on for the delivery of the orders, and it's also, as I stated earlier, it's a single point of access, and it gives you access to all of the North Carolina markets. Are there any questions on this segment?
There are no questions in the chat. We can take this opportunity if someone has a question, unmute and ask.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My name's Erskine Walker, and I have a moving company, Bless Movers, and I'm really trying to figure out, am I doing the right thing by being on here? And I don't know, I'm brand new at this.
So thank you for your question. I think you are doing the right thing for being up here, because really what you want to know is how do you do business with the state, regardless of the agency. And you also want to be registered. You want to be certified. You want to be registered. You want to make sure that for the opportunities that are out there that you get notification of that. So I think you are in the right place at the right time for that.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There is a question about the 1.75% fee that's charged. And the question is, what is it based off of and when is it paid?
So it's based off of goods. So it's only applicable to goods. And so that's what it's based off of. So it's not based on how much the purchase order is, right? It is 1.75% of the goods that are awarded, right? And so that will be that's a finance thing. But I think that what that comes, it comes from the you get a purchase order. So if you get awarded, you get a purchase order that gives you the authority, if you will, to send or do the work that we were being contracted to do. And then at the completion of that, at the receipt of the goods, if it's a good, if the completion of the work, if it's a service, then you would invoice the state, you would send in a bill, right? And so that's 1.75% of that. If it's a good, not the service part, but if it's a good, it's 1.75% of that.
Any other questions? All right, Joni, we can
Thank you.
proceed.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah.
So in this section, we're going to talk about the mandated resources, kind of mentioned that versus open market competition a little earlier. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. We're going to talk about special provisions, as well as a little bit about the HUD certification. Don't really get into that because we got experts on HUD certification on the call, and I know that they do other outreach activities that helps in that category, but do want to mention it because it's a very important part of our purchasing world as well. So mandated resources are, really before we buy, the state procurement offices, before we buy, we first must consider whether there are mandated resources. Are there places where we have to receive these items or service from before we compete it, before we look outside of this area? So we obviously look at the mandated state term contracts. Remember, we talked about state term contracts can be either mandatory or convenience. If it's mandatory, we have to use it. If it's convenience, we do not. We being the state government offices. If it's something, an item that's offered through correction enterprises or any of those that are listed there, then we are first required to buy them from them. Now, if these identified agencies here are departments cannot provide what we need when we need it, then they generally will release us, send us an email, some type of confirmation that they cannot meet our needs, and then we will go out and do a competitive process or do a quote process, depending upon the amount for the good and or service that we're looking for. So just a little bit about DIT, the Department of Information Technology purchases. They also approve, as I stated earlier, any of the purchases that are IT that are over an agency delegation. They also have their own state term contracts. And they also have what they call DIT projects, where it requires a little bit more involved scrutiny in terms of, we want to make sure in this day and time that, things like personal information. So for all the agencies, for HUD participation, we all are working towards, at a minimum, meeting the 10% goal, but it is every director that I've spoken with, we're really searching to go beyond the 10%, but we're at a minimum, we are all trying to reach the 10%, both in spending goods and services for HUD participation. So HUB certification is really important to all of the agencies. So I encourage you to make sure you are HUB certified, and to make sure you keep your certification current, because particularly in those smaller, and I keep saying smaller, but if you get enough you know $30,000 contracts, or even $25,000 contracts, or even $20,000 contracts. If you get enough of those from different agencies in a year, that kind of adds up, right? So please don't think of small as being just hundreds of dollars. Uh, but it is just a category that the state uses, but it does not, I think, does not make something not worth your time or effort, because I think that it does a couple of things, right? It puts you on the radar of the folks who are going to actually use your good or services, which means that it gets your foot in the door, right? You perform, they ask you to, you perform, you provide the goods, you're timely, your workers, meets their needs, all their requirements are met, then you are a good vendor. They want to do repeat business with you, right? And it just, snowballs from there. So please, when I say small, it does not in any way take away from, I think, the importance of trying to get into that market, or the ability to grow from that, right? But we're all looking for that 10%. I actually have someone specifically on my staff that is charged with focusing solely on HUB vendors, right? That is what she does, right? And for our HUB initiative, we've all added language on our solicitation documents that promote and encourage HUB participation. And we also provide projected upcoming opportunities. Please, Carla, if you don't mind, please provide Nicole's contact. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
When you provide the information after the session. And so
Sure.
Nicole Giammi is the vendor liaison for here at NCDOT. A lot of the other agencies have also hired vendor liaisons, but she will be your main point of contact to reach out. And even if you want to reach out to another agency, please, if you have Nicole's contact, reach out to her. She can help you get in contact if it's another agency that you're trying to do work with. She also, refer you to our HUB office or wherever it's applicable. Right, we're here to help. We want to make sure all the agencies exceed this 10% number. So a HUB plan, one of the ways that we kind of talk about, this is just an example of how we promote and encourage HUB vendor selection. We in our small range, we make efforts to seek out HUB vendors. We actually here at NCDOT have started an initiative with our 14 different divisions across the state of North Carolina. Obviously, we are not able to work with all 14 at one time, so we are selecting 2 or 3 to begin with, and we are taking a look at their P card purchases. Remember, I say anything that is $10,000 or less, they just automatically buy it off a P card. And so we're taking a look at what those things are that they are automatically buying, and then we're going to put some effort in trying to identify HUB vendors that can provide that service, or that good or service, if that's applicable. Not many services in that category that would be bought with a P card, but it may be 1 or 2. But so in that case, we want to identify. So we're going to go into different divisions, right? Which for NCDOT, the divisions are made of a collection of counties. And so we're going to go in those counties and try to help the divisions to identify HUB vendors that we could, put money in their pocket, right? That's our goal. We want to put money in our HUB vendors' pockets. And so in our open market, the range of $25,000 to $50,000, we require at least 1 quote to be submitted from a HUB vendor, right? So make sure your contact information is current at all times, because just like in any other business, right? We are trying to meet the need of our end user, right? So we have a customer, and our customer is, somewhere in our ferry division, somewhere in our aviation, somewhere in one of the divisions, um, somewhere in rail, someone who is waiting on us to provide them with a contract so that they can get the good and of services that they need. So we're all trying to do that. And so this is just an example of how we are being intentional about including and seeking hub vendors. Are there any questions?
We have answered the questions in the chat. If anyone has a question, you may unmute at this time. And so, Joni, if no questions.
Okay. So here we are in this section, we're going to discuss, the different types of solicitation documents. And we are going to talk about the content of those documents, what do they look like and what does it mean? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the requirements versus the evaluation criteria. So solicitation planning, generally, it's required information that needs to be provided to us by the end user. In other words, they have to identify, obviously, what the need is, define it for us. We are not subject matter experts. What we do is purchasing. So the development of specification and requirements, scopes of work, that kind of information, we need to work with the end user to provide to us, because they're the one who need this product or service. And so they have to provide, obviously, identifying information so that we can, go out and procure it. And so we get involved. We're going to review and authorize. We're going to prepare the solicitation document. That's what we do. But we are not the subject matter experts, and we don't make business decisions for the units. We use the information they provide us. We do the sourcing piece of it for them. We find them. We do the contracts. We help negotiate where applicable, and we actually award the contract and issue the purchase order. And the e-procurement, these are really talking about e-procurement tools. This vendor direct quote is either for it's good for goods or services, either one, and is used for purchases up to $25,000. And then the purchaser is able to select from a list of registered vendors. Another really good reason why you want to be registered in EBP. Another e-procurement tool is this IRQ. This informal request for a quote is for goods or services as well. And these are for purchases up to $50,000. We're able to, inside this tool, we're able to add language and specifications as needed. Again, the buyer is able to select from a list of registered vendors. We will send a quote directly to the vendor, right? And this also allows us, when we need to have the vendor agree to the North Carolina terms and conditions, because they can be attached to that as well. So our RFQ, request for a quote, is a solicitation document. It's usually normally used for non-advertised procurements. So those that do not require direct competition in terms of advertisement at that level, then we generally will use an RFQ for that. And it's sent directly to the vendor via email. It's going to end up in your inbox. Please make sure if you are checking, because we do go out again and search the hub vendor list and try to make sure we include at least one hub vendor for any of the RFQs that we send out in this category. And obviously, it's a solicitation. It's a document that belongs to the state, and so we would have our terms and conditions attached to that as well. It can be faxed or emailed back. I particularly, personally don't really care for the fax, only simply because where we are sitting, our copier room is shared by many other departments. And so I encourage my team to not allow fax returns. We want to email back so we know that we get it. If somebody walks into the copier room and by mistake and pick up a response, we won't know that. It may be, the next day or the day after before the person realized that they, picked up more than just what would belong to them. So I really personally do not encourage my staff to use the fax. My department will use email strictly. And in these cases, for the RFQs, the responses are open once we get them, where there's not a wait period that we have a specific day or time that we have to wait to open it. We're going to open it upon receipt. For the IFB, the invitation for bid, this is generally used for when we are seeking competition for well-defined goods and simple services, right? We know what we want. We know exactly what we want, right? We know that it's generally used over $50,000. And this is where bids are evaluated. In most cases for the IFB, we're going to use a low cost meet spec, meaning the lowest responsive bid meeting the specification will be awarded. These are posted to the IPS for a minimum of 10 days. They have to be posted for a minimum of 10 days. That's a requirement. These are public bid openings and potential site visits. We'll talk about site visits in a little bit more detail in a minute. A public bid opening, we will also touch on that as well. But so let's hold on for that. So RFP, as I stated earlier, this is really a request for a proposal. This is when we are seeking competition and obtaining offers for complex services or a combination of goods and services. It is a competitive process and it is rarely used for estimates that are under $50,000, right? And they are generally in a six-figure range, and in some cases, or as many cases, in the seven-figure range. So these are again more complex or a combination of goods and services. And they are used when a division or agency know the result, and what they're looking for the vendor is to provide a proposal on what's the best way to get to our result, right? We know what we want at the end, but we're trying to figure out, we want to know what's the latest information on the market, that's out there to help us get to that. And so it's also posted to IPS for a minimum of 10 days. Depending upon what it is, it may contain a site visit, but it is obviously advertised, so there will be a public bid opening related to the RFP. A request for information, a RFI is really just what that is. It's a request for information. We're going to gather that, ascertain the level of interest just based on the responses that we get. It is not a solicitation document. There will be no award or offer as a result of that. There are no terms and conditions because we're not going into a contract. And generally, after the response period of the RFI, it's canceled in IPS. After a review of the information that's gathered, there may be a decision after that to actually post a solicitation pertaining to what the RFI was asking about, but that's a business decision that may or may not happen, but the RFI itself will not result in a contract. What you have here are sections of the solicitation document. If you take a look at it, a document, they are clearly section off. And so the first section talks about is the purpose and background. That's where the agency is going to tell you what they're buying, why they're buying, and provide some background information that may help you understand what the agency is trying to do. The second section is really about general information section. That's where you're going to see the solicitation schedule, meaning that's where the bid is the bid opening date and time. We talk about written questions. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Written questions are required. That information is on the solicitation schedule, and that's in section 2. And any contents that's going to be included with the bid, that'll be there as well. If there are requirements for a number of responses, bid submissions that need to come back, that information is listed in section 2 as well. Section 3, we're going to talk here about the method of award. How are we going to award a contract? What's the evaluation process? What are the criteria? And so that information will be in section 3. In section 4, we're going to talk about kind of, more or less the details of the contract itself. We're going to talk about the terms, pricing, invoicing, delivery requirements. If there's, if warranty is applicable, then information will be there. If we want references, that information will be there as well. So you see all the different things that may pertain to a specific solicitation. That information will be, if applicable, included in section 4. In section 5, we're going to talk about the scope of work. That's where you will see the product specifications. If there are any tasks or deviations that are allowed, that information is in a certification for safety reasons. That information is provided there. If there's a technical approach, or in the case of RFP, if we're asking the vendor to provide that, then information will be there as well. Section 6 is more on contract administration. That's where we will ask you to identify, particularly if it's a service and it's going to take more than just one submission to do, meaning one time to complete it. It's going to be a series of tasks. Then we probably are going to ask you for a project manager identification, name and the number or contact point at that point. We also will provide you with a contact point for the state for that contract. If there's a dispute on resolution, there's language there that that identifies for the state what our preference is on regard how that would be handled, and how contract changes, if any are needed, how they would be handled. The last portion of a solicitation are where attachments are, and each solicitation will clearly state what attachments are required to be returned with your bid submissions. So let's talk about documents of change. So an addendum, if I post a bid, if I post the IFB, right, and once I post it out on IPS and I identify that I need to change something, right? Maybe, let's keep it simple. Maybe I posted it, I don't know, January 1st. And so the opening date is January the 12th. And so in the midst between the 1st and the 12th, there's been additional information I've gained. There's been some things that have been pointed out to me, maybe by the end user. Maybe the end user want to give additional time. For whatever reason, if I'm going to change my opening date from the 12th, I believe I said, to the 25th, then the only way to change that is by using an addendum. So an addendum is a document that's used to change information once the document solicitation has been posted. So if you are interested in responding to a solicitation that is posted, please, please, please go back and check on frequently prior to the opening date to make sure that no addendum has been added, because it can change not only the opening date, it could change some specifications within the document itself, some requirements. It could change a lot of things, right? Obviously, if the document that's posted has significant changes that need to be, then we will cancel that and we'll repost at a later time. But if there are relatively minor changes that we need to do, we're going to do those changes in what we call an addendum. It would be in the same place as the original post that was posted. It'll just be right below it, right? The numbers haven't changed. It's just going to say an addendum, and you'll be able to click on that and you will be able to see a document that tells you what the change is. A request for clarification. Once the submission has been made, we've opened the your submission. If we have a question, right, we're going to send you what we call a request for clarification. That does not allow the bid to be changed. It just provides us with clarification on what you sent you. If we have a question, we're going to ask you to clarify that what we believe you mean by this is what you mean, right? A best and final offer, a BAFO is what we call it in-house. A BAFO is sent, that's only used during negotiations. If we are not going through a negotiation period with your solicitation, then you will not see a BAFO. But if we do negotiate at the end of the negotiation session, and generally what happens is that, say we had we had a solicitation posted, bids came in, they were evaluated, and say we had 7 vendors who responded. We like the top 3 for, they garnered the highest evaluation scores. And so we want to bring those 3 vendors in, or we want to begin negotiations with those. So we will separately, without knowledge of one or the other, contact them, and we will invite them to a session. We will tell them nothing about any other vendor's proposal. We will focus strictly on theirs and what our questions are, or any changes we want to see, and kind of negotiate pricing with them. And then at the end, and we will do that for each one of the vendors that we're going to negotiate with, again, separately, without any mention of the other vendor. At the end of each separate session, we will send them a document. It's called Best and Final Offer. It's much simpler than the solicitation document. It could be 3 pages, maybe 4. And in that document, we'll say very specifically, it'll be based on the communication, the talk that we had, right? The negotiations that we had, because that BAFO becomes a legal document and it attached to the originally posted solicitation, and it is incorporated in the contract. And so that makes it legally binding on both parties. And so it has to be signed as well. An amendment, and that is the document that we use once the contract has been awarded. So we award you a contract. Generally, the amendments are used to extend the contract for a longer period of time, or to change pricing, get a price increase is what generally they're used for. So submitting your bid and proposal, what I encourage you to do is really, really pay attention to the language that are there. Those words, for instance, what you see here, shall, must, and mandatory, those are binding words. And so make sure that you pay attention to that. If it says shall, must, and mandatory, then anything that contradicts that, if it says shall and you don't provide it, if it says must and you don't provide it, if it says mandatory and you don't provide it, then your bid submission will be determined to be non-responsive, meaning you did not provide what we need in order to evaluate you. So your bid will not be evaluated. So please pay attention to those words. Please make sure you sign there. You see where the error is there on the screen, the vendor. Make sure you sign your submission. We have received submissions that are not signed. If you send us an unsigned document, and we will consider that to be non-responsive, because it is not a legal binding document on your behalf. And so we will have passed our opening date. We will not be able to accept a new one. Please make sure you sign it. Your signature means you understand and you agree. Okay. So this is an example. I said earlier when we were talking about the different sections that the solicitation schedule was in section 2, general information. So this is what that looks like. This literal table would be on the solicitation document. And it indicates in the middle section there who has the responsibility. So obviously the state is going to issue this solicitation. We're going to hold a pre-bid meeting or a site visit. We will, the vendor, if you have any questions, then you need to submit them in this date and time column. When the solicitation is posted, it will be a date and time for the requirement for each line item there. I do want to point out that even though it does have contract award and contract effective dates, those last 2 may or may not be on the schedule. But please note that the contract award date and the contract effective date, those are dates that we're working towards. And of course, depending upon how long, how far the evaluation goes, And if we get into negotiations, that may make those 2 dates be bumped out just a little bit, but just keep that in mind. But definitely the bid submission date, provide written questions dates. Those are critical dates. If you miss those, there are no go backs for those. Okay, none whatsoever. All right, vendor questions. Let's talk a little bit about that. Once the solicitation has been posted, you really should only contact the purchasing staff that's listed on solicitation. So there's a name, email, and a phone number for the person on my team that is managing that particular solicitation. Once it's posted, if you have any, if you have a need to contact someone, please contact that person that's listed there. Please submit your questions in writing. If you pick up the phone and call someone, they may answer the phone. Please know this. Whatever answer they give you verbally, it is not legally binding on the state. So you need to submit your question. They may answer your question. Even if they answer it, please submit them an email asking that same question, because they're going to have to provide it to you in a written form. And then generally what we do is let's go back to my first example. So I said I post something on January 1st and it's due on January, I think I said 12th, right? And so sometime between there, somewhere around this January 6th or the 7th, I would say on my documents in my section there, it would say that any written questions must be received by January 6th, 2 p.m., right? All the questions I get in between the 1st and the 6th, I'm going to take them, post them on I'm going to take them and put them on a table, right? Get one today, put it at, get 10 tomorrow, put all 10 on the table. I am not going to answer any one of the questions until after that January 6th, 2 p.m., right? And some of the questions are procurement related questions that my team will provide, because one side we had on that table, one side is the questions, the other column is the responses to the questions. If they are procurement questions, then my team will provide the response. If they are subject matter expert kind of questions that the end user, the division that's doing, or the business unit that's doing it, we're going to send the question to them and ask them to give us a real quick turnaround with the appropriate response. We're going to take the response and post it, copy and paste it onto that table. Then we're going to, remember we talked about how you add additional information. We're going to put an addendum out that has all of the questions and all of the responses so that everyone can see them at all the questions, all the responses at the same time. So even if you decide to call someone and if they decide to answer, right, they really shouldn't. They should encourage you to send the question in writing. But if they decide to answer your question, if you want that response to be binding on the state, legally binding, please make sure you send them a written question by the deadline and the day and time that's listed on the solicitation so that it will be binding. Again, all questions submitted will be answered and posted to IPS in an addendum. The site visits. So these are can be either mandatory or urgent caution. If it says mandatory, if you want your bid submission to be considered, then you have to attend the site visit, right? If it's mandatory, it's going to tell you the specific date, time, and location where the visit is going to take place. There will be a sign-in sheet. You must sign in and sign out. Late vendors, we're not gonna argue with you about whether you're late or not, but you will not be able to sign in because we will take up the sign-in sheet at the time once that time has arrived, right? So if you come in afterwards, there will be nothing for you to sign. We're not gonna, get into any discussion about that. But offers from late vendors or vendors who did not attend would not be accepted. So you can send it, obviously if it comes through the mail, we're gonna have to take it, but we will not open it and we would not be evaluated. If the site visit is designated as urged and cautioned, then we think it's in your best interest to come, but you don't have to, right? It's urged and cautioned. Again, the specific date, time, and location would be indicated. We will have a sign-in sheet. If you are late, it does not matter because you didn't have to come. We will allow you to sign in, and your attendance is not a requirement for us to evaluate your offer. That is for urged and cautioned. Make sure you understand which one is the site visit is designated. If it's mandatory, you have to be there on time in order for your bid submission to be evaluated. If it says urged and cautioned, we strongly suggest that you go, but you do not have to. You can submit a bid. You can have a bid submission, and it will be evaluated. The submittal instructions are, please make sure you pay particular attention what they are, what the deadlines are, what mandatory information has to come back, if there are any mandatory site visit or even urged and cautioned, but mandatory specifically because that's a go or no go, right? If you're not there, we're not gonna evaluate your bid submission. Please pay attention, whether it's by mail. We also do electronic bids as well. Vendor requirements, this really is, you really want to make sure that you meet these, and this is going to determine whether your bid submission will be found to be responsive or non-responsive, right? The requirements are yes or no, and they're really not required, an evaluation. If we say you have to return a particular document and you do not, then the answer is no, and your bid is non-responsive. So another example of that, if on the solicitation, we say that the product has to be received within 15 consecutive calendar days of receiving the order. Then if you respond that you can get it in 20 days, then you do not meet the requirement. And so your bid is not responsive, right? So we would not. So pay attention to those kinds of things, please. Evaluation criteria. This is really on the how and what the state is going to be evaluating. So and these are some examples of what could possibly be listed as criteria for evaluation. Like we're going to look at vendor experience, past relative experience. We're going to take a look at that. If there are any staffing plan, and staffing plan is more used generally more for the obviously for services that we want someone to come in and provide for us. We want to know really, who's going to be working on a team that is going to be providing us. We want to make sure that that staff person, right, has the right resume, right? They got the right experience. They have knowledge of similar projects that we are going to be working with them with. So those are some of the things that we take a look at. And then obviously one of the criteria we're going to evaluate is the technical approach. How are you going to meet the state's needs, right? And so you should make sure you include that information, be as descriptive as possible on each task and the deliverable to make sure that it's clearly denoted there on how you are going to, what is your technical approach and how you're going to meet and exceed the state's requirements. Are there any questions?
There are questions in the chat. One question being, once a company bids, what is the turnaround time on a response to see if we are awarded the contract?
Okay, so that would depend on what kind of solicitation it is. Generally for the RFQs, when you say bid, I'm gonna translate that into any submission, right? Whether it is a email one and it's a RFQ. If it's an RFQ and we email that to you, you get it back to us. I'm gonna say 3 to 5 days. It should even, within that time frame, you should get a response back. If you do not, one way or the other, then you should reach out to the procurement specialist that sent you the document for your email and just ask for a status. If it's a competitively bid, meaning we post an advertisement and we posted it would depend on a couple of things. One, if it's a simple low cost meets specification bid, I would say 10 days, on average. Because what happens is we get the bids in, we're going to determine whether the bid is responsive or non-responsive. If it's responsive, then we're going to send that bid on to the end user, the person that we're making the team or the department that we're making the procurement for, right? And for their review of the of the submissions and their recommendation to us for an award, right? We are not going to select that. That's not what we do. We're going to make sure that whatever selection they recommend to us is that vendor has met the requirements, and it was the best offer for the state, right? And so once we get that back, then we will issue an award, and obviously and purchase order that goes along with that. So it really depends on the complexity of it, but I would say for the simple ones, 3 to 5 days. The other ones, it may take 10, 15 days, but again, you have a point of contact in the procurement office. Make sure you send that person an email or call that person at that point and just ask, and generally they'll let you know where we are in the process.
Next question, or suggestion even for slides 32 through 35, where we were talking about IFQ, IFB, RFQ, and RFP. Do you have, or would you consider a chart showing the differences and common features?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you
All
for
right.
that.
Okay, and then are digital signatures accepted, or electronic signatures?
Yes, they are.
Yes. I'm trying to cover the questions that are pertaining to, okay, yes, that are pertaining to the section we just covered. And I think that did it for those questions. And then we have a question regarding opportunities. And the question is, are there opportunities available for training and support staff augmentation? And that was Esther who posed that question. And I'm thinking she's speaking of within state agencies. Are those type opportunities available? And Esther, if you want to unmute and confirm if that is your question.
Yes, that is correct. You interpreted that well. Yes, thank you.
Yes, so my answer to that is yes. I mean, I think that we recently had a RFP that was posted that had to do with training. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, which is, again, you need to be registered, you need to get the notification, and you need to respond in the time frame. But yes, there are training and development type opportunities that are available.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There's a question regarding business insurance. The question is the business insurance required before you are actually awarded?
No, we're not going to ask you to incur a cost that, you may not need. So no, generally the solicitation documents will state how long you will have after the award period in order to provide the documentation of the required insurance coverage.
And along those lines, when I offer a service such as language and translation, do I still need to submit insurance?
That you will have to look for that requirement on each individual solicitation, because that might be different depending upon, what the translation or where it's going to be and who's going to be involved in the room. So I don't think that there is any one generic answer to that question. So I would encourage you to, if there's a requirement, it would be explicitly identified in the solicitation document.
Okay. And then in reference to work done, what if the work has not been done at any state level?
Okay, so I still think that makes it relevant. Generally, they're looking at work that's done at the scope, at the size that they're looking for, even if it's not done with a state agency, is done with a private company, then that's fine. I don't think that's not a disqualifying factor in my mind.
And then final question in the chat, do you have to have your business for a certain amount of time in order to have a contract proposed to you?
No. Now, for some of the more, let me put a caveat with that. So for some of the, obviously more complex kinds of RFPs that may be out there, they may ask for something that your length of time in that field may be affected by. For instance, if they're asking you for information on previous contracts that you've had, whether private or with the state, on the same level or the same scope of work, and if your previous information is kind of limited, it may have that same effect. But there is no rule that says that you have to be in business a certain time in order to get a contract.
Right. And I think that takes care of all the questions in the chat. And I just want to, there was a question about whether the presentation would be shared, and that answer is yes, it will be emailed. And then a couple of times IPS was referenced in the previous module, and we have placed in the chat a link to our new electronic vendor portal. That electronic vendor portal replaced IPS. And so we've placed a link in the chat, and I just wanted to say that for clarity. And so, Joni, I don't think we have any other questions at this moment, and so we can proceed.
All right. All right, so we're going to talk about shift gears again, and talk about different ways and options to submit your proposal or your bid submission. And so again, we talked about it can be done over email, and those are the categories you see there are generally what's used for those. Those are generally smaller purchases. There's the collaborative tool that's within e-procurement. That's within the EVP tool now. IPS, which is colleges stated, is now being referred to as EVP. And I'll update my slide to make that more clear. But you could do either NC Bids or the EVP is the portal now that is used for that. So those are different ways in which bid submissions can be provided. But I think the takeaway here again is just to stress the importance of being able to, when we do a EVP, the agencies do a EVP vendor search, that we will be able to find you with correct information. So that collaborative space is really the informal quoting and pricing system that's within the EVP. They use this to obtain quotes for goods and services from multiple vendors at the same time, so we can send it out to more than one vendor. It also allows us to be able to get the vendor to agree to the terms and conditions, and is generally used for purchases up to $25,000. The EVP posting is for what it says there is a formal way of doing the solicitations, of posting the solicitation, I'm sorry. It allows us, the agencies, to be able to advertise for what our goods and services that needed. Is a way to offer open and fair competition. It's also, we also post the notices of award there. So if you want to know who was awarded, you can find that information on EVP as well. And it does allow you, the vendor, to be able to market, again, goods and services 24/7. And also you'll get a chance to look at the view, not only who it was awarded to, but in cases of particularly goods and sometimes with services, the pricing sheet is tabulated, meaning, there's line 1, there's line 2 that have, if it's a good different requirements. And then when we post the award, we also will post the tabulation, so you be able to go back and take a look and see what each line, the awarded amount was for each line. So when you go into EVP, this is just a way of publicly displaying all the solicitation that's posted there. And so if you click on solicitation, the link that's shown there at the top, you'll be able to, and then the browse button, you'll be able to get that as well. If you're responding to our solicitation, you'll see there in the area that's circled, it says click on respond to solicitation. That will allow you to be able to submit your bid. If you are wanting to view the tabulations that I just mentioned or the award, you will see those two buttons that are there, clearly tabulation and award. You will click on those and you will be able to see the information there. NC Bids, that's the North Carolina Business Invitation Delivery System is what it stands for. And it's you must be registered, obviously in the vendor portal to use it. Obviously you will need a name and password for that. It is a feature of IPS/EVP now, and that you can upload the proposal there. This e-procurement sourcing, really the takeaway from this slide is it has the links, and we have to register, and you need to make sure your information is kept up to date. I cannot stress that because we really take the time. I'm really encourage my staff to take the time. We're intentional about encouraging and promoting the use of hub vendors. So I have my staff, they are directed to go and take a look, and particularly in those categories that we can just award, right? We don't have to go through an additional process. We can just award a contract to look for hub vendors. So that classification and that current information are critical pieces for us in that time. What you see here on this slide, this sourcing event title, just really tells you what it is that you're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at discovery testing, and that is the number that's associated with that. If you want to respond to the posting, you see the button to click to do that. If you want to see the summary, the actual end time of the bid due date, that is there's a calendar or clock, I would say, that is constantly clicking down to that. So that'll be clearly, you could clearly see that as well. On this side, you see at the top, it also shows the time remaining in order to offer your bid. If you want to see if there's any prerequisites that are required for this submission, then that button helps with that. There's a checklist there as well of steps to take. And then if you want to see the content of the, and obviously you want to see the content of the document, then you will take a look at in that section as well. Are there any questions?
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. One question from Juliana: if we are asked to purchase items for the state, furniture, for example, and the bill comes to $70,000, are we required to pay for that up front? How does that work for a small business?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but if we solicit a furniture, right, we'll just use that as an example, but that is generally a correction enterprise depending upon the or state term contract. But let's just use it as an example. If we solicit for furniture and you respond and say, I don't know, say we got 10 office chairs, and we select your submission and we award you, then we would need the chairs to be delivered. You would invoice us and we would pay you. So we would not, if your question is, will we pay you and so that you can go buy the chairs? We will not do that. So yes, you would need to be able to provide the service and or good and complete that that purchase order, that award, and then you would be then your invoice would be paid. Is that the question, Carla?
Yes, I believe so. Juliana,
Okay.
if you want to have some input there, you can unmute. If that may have answered your question. And then the next question in the chat, is there a way to research a previously awarded contract to see what the amount was if it is a service?
Absolutely, there is. So I generally talk about that, but I will say it now. I'm just trying to see where I would talk about that. But so for NCDOT, for any agency, really, if you want to have information, there is something that's called a public record request. And so you are entitled as a citizen of the state for any contract that has been awarded, you are entitled to that information. So you ask for it and they must provide it. Now, we are required to maintain, the agencies are required to maintain contract awards for 5 years after the end of the contract. So if it's one of these contracts that's been renewed, extended, then it may be a little longer than 5 years. But or if it's one of the more than 3-year contracts, we may be required to keep it longer than 5 years simply because of the length of the contract itself. But yes, you can make a public record request and ask for the previous contract awarded amount for that specific contract that you're asking for. Absolutely.
All right, and then our last question in the chat is, which system is NC Bids? And
that's part of the bid submission. So that would be a part of the new EVP.
that's correct. Yes, it is now EVP.
Yes.
As of July 10th. All right, and so no more questions in the chat. If there are no questions from anyone that wishes to unmute, then Joni, we can proceed.
Thank you. So we're gonna now cover the evaluation process. We're gonna talk about bid openings, evaluation methods, reference checks. We just a little bit about Executive Order 50 and clarification is baffles. We spent just a short time because we kind of talked about that previously. With the bid opening, this is a part of the formal bid process. There will be a publicly open date, time, and location that's specified on every solicitation. Please know that late bids and proposals are not accepted. Attendance is taken at the bid opening simply so we can document who was actually in the room. You are not, you have the right to attend any publicly any bid opening because they are publicly opened. But if you don't have the time, space to actually be there, you can email the person contact number, name and email address on the solicitation document after the bid opening date and ask if they will send you a copy of the bid opening sheet. And it will contain the name of each bid that was open, the company submitting the bid. If it's not a solicitation that we anticipate doing negotiations with, you will also receive the cost that was submitted with each bid. If it's a solicitation that we think we will go in, they will probably be the more complex ones that we will go into negotiations with. We will not provide the bid submission amount at the bid opening time. So you are encouraged actually to just email the procurement specialist and they will provide you with the bid opening sheet. Evaluation methods. Uh, their bids are evaluated in one of these three ways, right? It's the low cost meets spec. This is what is colloquially called, but it is the lowest cost method. It is award obviously to the lowest vendor that meets all of the requirements of the solicitation, right? That meets all of the requirements. Then we have what we call best value, which is not uh, based on the lowest cost. Best value is, we do an evaluation, obviously, and it is they use the weighted method, right? They're gonna the weights add up to 100. It may be if they have four categories, they're gonna tell you the weight of each one of the categories, right? And the total of the four categories will equal 100. The different components of that criterion will can and will um, equal something, a different weighted amount, right? But the total of it would be 100. And then we have what we call the narrative method. Is really the written account of the merit of what you're submitting, and is evaluated in terms of strengths or weaknesses. And so a strength obviously is something that enhances the potential success of what you're offering, and a weakness is a risk, right? If there's any risk that identified, and so that would be categorized as a weakness. And reference checks, these are used to confirm the vendor has performed a service or offered a product of a same or similar size and scope. It can be added to the solicitation document. You need to look for that, but because it's not a requirement, they may or may not ask for references. So please make sure you take a look at that. What I will say about that is that we will either call every reference or we will call no reference, because remember I said pay attention to the language. The language could say that we may check references, right? Or it would say we shall or we will check reference. If it says shall or will, then we are going to call them. If it says may, they may or may not do that. But if it says may and we call one vendor's references, we're going to call all vendor references. There's no, there is no gate with that, right? If you do one, you do them all. If you don't do any, then no one's references will be checked. So make sure you pay attention to the language of that. Clarifications and backflows, we kind of talked about that earlier, so I'm just going to keep moving forward with that. Price matching, that's the Executive Order 50. It offers the opportunity for North Carolina vendors, that's vendors that are headquartered in North Carolina, to be able to price match if the winning bidder was not a North Carolina bid. So you must indicate it, whether you want to have the opportunity to price match. You must indicate that, and obviously this is for goods, right? And so you must indicate that at the time that you make your submission, and that their price must be within 5% of $10,000 of the non-resident vendor winning bid in order to take advantage of the price matching opportunity. Are there any questions?
There are two questions in the chat. One question being, when trying to obtain a non-emergency medical transportation contract, which state department would I speak with?
I would recommend that you speak to the Department of Health and Human Services as well as Adult Corrections. Just off the top of my head, I don't know, Carl, if you got another suggestion.
I definitely was thinking Health and Human Services, and both sounds about right. Can you talk about unsolicited proposals? Does the state accept unsolicited proposals?
Um, let me say this. I want to say that's a great question. So generally, probably the answer is no. But let me give you an avenue, right? If you have an idea that you think is a more efficient, time saving, money saving idea, proposal that you would like to make, what I would suggest you do is reach out to the agency division, in our case, or business unit that would be a particular for. And if you don't have a point of contact for someone inside of that business unit, then I would start with the procurement, start with Nicole for the case of NCDOT, right? Start with Nicole and let her know what you want to do, who you are trying to reach out to, and she can help with getting a point of contact. So please don't. So if you do an unsolicited submission, that none for NCDOT goods and services under Ward 43, my department is the group that received those, and we won't know what to do with it. So it sounds like you want to put an idea before someone who can make a business decision around the need of that. Then that would be outside of purchasing, but we can help you in terms of contact name and numbers. Is that helpful?
All right.
All right.
And that is all of the questions that are in the chat. And so if, unless someone has a question and wants to unmute, then we can proceed.
Thank you. All right, in this section, we're going to talk about award notifications, a little bit about purchase order and invoicing. The award notification, we will send a actual certification of award memo to the vendor. We will also attach e-procurement purchase order. We are transitioning as other agencies into Ariba, and in some cases, this can be done through email or electronically. And so awards are posted on EVP now, and within 3 days, and they generally will continue to stay out there in the new EVP system for 30 days. Once the award is made, it says you can contact the contract administrator, and really what that is saying is my office, from the point that the solicitation is posted, then the procurement specialist in my office or any procurement specialist in the procurement office within any agency should be the point of contact from the time the solicitation is posted. Then once that posting is recommended and approved for award and awarded, at that point, the purchasing will step back from the process and you would work directly with the business unit or the division in the case so that that needed the good and or service that you will be providing. On the purchase orders, there's just a list of information that could be included up there. There are other additional information. There are notes or comments that can be added there as well. The terms and conditions are generally listed there, as well as payment terms, delivery schedule, etc. In terms of enforcing, what you see there is really what is included. Ensure that the remit to address is current. That can be updated in EVP. So you need to make sure that is done. Typically, the state pays in net 30. NCDOT write checks on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we like to use the electronic payment system. So hopefully you are equipped to be able to receive your payment electronically. If you're not, then they actually write checks on Tuesdays and Thursdays for NCDOT. Are there any questions?
There are no questions in the chat at this time. I do see a hand raised. If you want to unmute, Andrew.
Yes. I'm Andrew Lindsay. I've got a question about you use the Ariba system.
Yes.
And Are are there going to be any classes on using the Ariba system? I've been trying to navigate that system for a while now, and it is sort of cumbersome trying to get from point A to point B, and and making sure that you get to the point where you supply the services, because there is a different pricing, there's a different spacing for the goods, and then there's another area that's separate for shipping, and figuring that one out, is kind of difficult at sometimes.
So, but let me, yeah, we probably need, those are one-off kinds of things. So when, Carla sends out the information, will you reach out to Nicole, Jeremy, and just tell her you have an Ariba question? And that I, Joni, asked, that your question be given to me. And then I make sure someone on my team, and make sure she has your name, and email address, and phone number, right? And I make sure one of my team leads reach out to you, and we'll get you what you need.
Okay, and who's that again, Nicole?
Yes, Nicole. Carla's going to provide Nicole's contact information.
Okay, all right.
And I also put a link in the chat to the e-procurement trainings, which may include the Ariba network. I have not looked for that particularly, but the link does include the training that's offered for e-procurement tools. And so it would be handy to kind of peruse through there to see if it's offered.
Right, and also how we can get on the electronic payment system. Is there a website or something that, who do we need to contact to for those electronic payments?
There is so on that, when Carla sends out this presentation, there is a website that's there, and so there's if you go to that, there's a form that you can find out that you need to fill out.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
And again, if you have a problem with that, when you reach out to Nicole, let her know, right? And we'll get you the help you need with that too, as well.
All right. Thank
We
you so
did
much.
put, I'm sorry, we did put a direct link to Ariba training in the chat, so it is there.
Right, and he was asking specifically around the electronic payment.
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay.
I got that one too.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
All
Perfect.
right. If no other questions, we can proceed forward.
All right, we're almost done. So in this last section, we're gonna talk about contract management, a little bit about inspection and testing, renewal and amendments, vendor protests, what that is, and public records request. We kind of talked about that a little bit. So our contract kickoff meeting is really what happens once we have awarded the contract. We encourage our end users to meet with the awarded vendor, whether that's virtually or important, and to clarify terms and conditions and make sure everybody's on the same page, clarify goals and objectives, and make sure we're real clear on what our roles and responsibilities and delivery expectations are. As far as inspection and testing, obviously the state is going to notify the vendor if we receive any, damaged goods, if the order is inadequate, or if it's a late shipment, we're going to be calling to see where we are with that. If there are quality exception, inspection, delivery, or installation kinds of requirements on a contract, then the invoice is not going to be paid until that work has been inspected and accepted, right? We want to be clear about that. And delivery is considered to be completed once all of any waste or debris is removed from the site as well. So that is a requirement. If there are any vendor complaints, then we ask for the contract administrator, you know, the point of contact once we have award the contract. That person needs to really be the first point of communication. And then that person needs to make sure my office is kept in a loop of that. If they're unable to resolve an issue or a complaint with a vendor, and they escalate it to my office, then we're gonna send a formal letter asking for it to be resolved. So, well, that's how the complaint process really works. We really hope that it can be managed by the contract administrator and the vendor. But if it does escalate to my office, then we are going to send out cure, what we call cure, a letter of cure, which asks for specific actions and deadlines, and a response from the vendor. And so it's more of a formal process and documented process. In terms of renewals, again, I stated that most contracts are 3 years. They are generally 1 year with 2 optionals. The renewals are optionals, which means they do not have to be exercised. Generally, they are, but they do not have to be. And for each, if we do renew it, then obviously we're going to issue a new purchase order. So for that new year. Amendments, again, that is what's used to change any of the things that are listed there once the contract has been awarded. And only the purchasing office can change the terms of a contract, right? So you need to make sure that just like the initial contract was signed, if we have an amendment, it should be signed by both parties as well. And for goods and services purchased under 143 for NCDOT, or for for NCDOT, let me speak for what I know. NCDOT, then that means there needs to be a signature from my office, right? Depending upon the amount as to who in my team would sign it. So vendor protest, this is an opportunity for, if we do a solicitation, we make an award, you were one of the submissions, you do not think that the process was followed as outlined in the solicitation document, this is an opportunity for you to submit a written request for the review of that award, right? It must be submitted within 30 consecutive calendar days from the date of the award. And you must provide specific reasons in any supporting documentation you can for the reason for your protest. Public records request kind of talks about that a little bit. You're able to request that for any awarded contracts. As I stated earlier, just keep in mind there's a 5-year contract record retention law for North Carolina State. But that is after the completion of a contract. So for those contracts that are amended or extended, then it could be very well longer than 5 years. But and in some cases they have the documentation longer than 5 years for whatever reasons. But just kind of keep that in mind. That is the time frame that some agency are looking at. Also keep in mind, if you make a public record request, if any confidential information is as identified by the vendor, right, is included in that, it will be redacted, right, before we send it out to you as a result of a public records request. I will say this, if you're a vendor and you decide to classify or identify certain pieces of information as being confidential, and by the way, cost is never confidential. Under no circumstances will the state of North Carolina categorize cost as confidential. So you cannot say, I don't want my price given to anyone else. At the point that we would not do that during the evaluation process, it all is confidential at that point. But once the solicitation has been awarded, cost becomes public information. We will not hold that. If you identify something else within your solicitation as being classified as confidential, the state, I say we're going to send us a letter of clarification, if we have any questions, we're going to send you a letter to ask you to make sure you understand that by your designating this information as confidential, then the state is going to respect that. However, if a vendor challenged the state on the confidentiality of that information, then the vendor is going to be required to defend that in a court of law. The state is not going to defend your decision that your information is confidential. We would start, and we're going to tell you that as well, just so we're clear about what that is. I think it's very important to make sure that understand all of the ramifications when you identify a piece of information as confidential. Include, and when you're making a public record request, please include as much information as you can. It helps the procurement office to identify the contract that you were referring to. We do quite a few contracts, so yeah, as much information as you can provide would be very helpful in being able to quickly get you the information that you're asking for. These are just kind of quick websites that you will have available to you once Carla sends out the information. Are there any questions? And Carla, that completes my presentation for today, but I will take any final questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joni. There is a question in the chat, and the question is, are invoice payments remitted on a schedule for large jobs or not until the entire job is complete?
So I think that's handled differently for different large jobs, right? There are, and so that could be part of the negotiations before you go, before the contract is signed, completed or awarded. So we can have milestones, right? What we call milestones. So you can have certain periods within, if it's a huge job, once you complete that section, then you are entitled to a certain percentage. So that is done that way as well. So that certainly is something that's negotiable.